Hey, Lena. Hey, John Paul.
Good morning. Just a heads up, I'm working from the basement this morning, so I'm going to leave my video off unless anybody really wants to see me that bad.
No problem.
As I had already explained to Jenna this morning, at various points already today, I've been able to hear mariachi music out my window, so you may get a different type of experience here as well.
Never heard a loss of things going on there in your town, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, my town is an active one.
Okay.
Alrighty, some more folks joining. Alright, slightly smaller group than some of our previous meetings, but I wonder if we want to get started, or do we want to give people another minute or two?
I think we could get started. Want to be sensitive to folks' times. I think we've got a good group who've joined us, so.
Alrighty. Erin, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to say, start off with welcoming everyone. Good morning, everyone. Erin Beck with the Mayor's Office. I think I know everybody on this group now, and I don't think I saw any other members of the public who have joined, but if there are, welcome. I know we have a lot of great information to get through today, so I do want to be brief, but thank you all again for participating in this aggregation advisory group. Really appreciate all of the inputs and insights that all of you are bringing to the table, and frankly, enjoy getting to learn right along with all of you. So this is definitely a really important initiative that we're working on, something that's really going to be transformational for our community. So just appreciate working with the community to make sure that it's the most impactful program we can have. And again, really excited for today's conversation to just delve into renewables and what that really means and get feedback, questions, insights from all of you. I think it's going to be a great conversation. And I did want to point out too, just was looking a few minutes ago, there were 2 great articles in the Dispatch today around the aggregation effort. So just thought I would share that with the group if you want to keep an eye out for those. And with that, I think I'll hand things back over to Sonia.
Thanks very much. All righty. Welcome, everyone. By now, this slide should look pretty familiar to folks, but just a quick reminder that we are excited to get your input, and as Erin said, also to learn alongside as this group helps the city think through sort of the sustainability-focused community priorities and how this program, the CCA program, can support them. And also hope that this is information that is also being more broadly disseminated amongst your networks and the groups that you work with closely and represent. The norms as usual, to hope folks feel free to turn on your video, interact throughout, and really be present for this conversation, and practice democracy of time, as I think folks have been good at doing so far. Zoom reminders are as usual. I think folks have got this down by now. Feel free to use the chat function, of course. If you can rename yourself with your name and organization with a little right click on the little 3 dots that appear by your name, just so that everyone is aware of who else is on the call. That's really helpful. And for folks in the public, please feel free to ask questions in the chat at any time, and we will have a couple points during the agenda. Actually, I think it's maybe 3 points during the agenda where we'll be opening up for questions. And just to give a sense of our agenda and flow today, so we'll again do a little bit of a recap of what we heard from you last meeting, and sort of go over the high points of what we touched on. Then we'll delve into what the renewable energy that we're talking about will look like, what those renewable energy products will be, and talk a little bit more even about some of the benefits that we see, particularly from that renewables piece. We'll spend a little bit of time at the end to just tee up and set up some of the conversations that we expect to have in 2 weeks around community grants, and then do a little bit of closing and next steps. And as we've timed it out, it's even possible that we might not go all the way up to that 11:30 mark, but we'll have to see about that. We may get a little bit of time back. So just to jump right in here, wanted to give a quick little recap of what we talked about 2 weeks ago, our last session. We talked a lot about the day-to-day nitty-gritty work of aggregation. We talked about and what the program really means on the ground. So this will be, we talked about contracting an energy supplier. So that would be the preferred supplier, PEP Energy at this point. And we talked quite a bit about the process of enrolling and disenrolling eligible residents, and really just overall what the resident experience will be like throughout this program from multiple vantage points. at the beginning of the program in terms of getting an opt-out letter or learning about the program through other means if you're already contracted with an energy supplier. The way that we will do sweeps to identify new residents and maintain participation in the program. That value add of sort of proactive communication with residents who have chosen another energy supplier, and we spent some time in breakout groups exploring that question and helping residents with questions they have. And then finally, the final touch point is really around how this program can help meet community goals for health, economic development, equity, and sustainability. It's a tall order. Just to give a quick recap, we had this diagram which hopefully helps crystallize it even a little bit more of the touch points for the customer. I think in some ways this program there's a lot going on, and so we want to be sure that it's that this group in particularly sort of understands what's going on behind the scenes, but also make it clear that there are just a few sort of key touch points for the average customer, and when those will be and how those will come. First, and probably most importantly, through this opt-out letter that will inform customers about the program. Secondly, through the much beloved energy bill that they will receive every month, that will bundle both the AEP Energy, the CCA charge, along with their usual charges from AEP Ohio. And then finally, the routes that they will have for asking questions, raising concerns, figuring out canceling or enrolling if they have specific circumstances. So that was the really high level overview of what we covered. And of course, we went into much more detail about each piece of this. But for the moment, just wanted to hand it over to Elena to also talk about what we heard coming out of that meeting and how we're going forward.
Thank you, Sonia, and thanks everybody. Sonia doesn't know, or she should know after these past two meetings how active you guys all are, but I have faith that we will make it all the way to 11:30 with discussion today. So we had a really great meeting last meeting. We heard a lot from you all, and we wanted to, talk again about what we heard and how we're responding. So one of the first things that came up in our conversation was the importance of providing information to customers who are customers of our division of power about the options, how the division of power is advancing public health and climate goals, and the options that are available to division of power customers. So we are currently working with the division of power to prepare a one-pager that addresses each of these areas so that those customers can understand what their municipal utility is doing in these areas and can kind of understand how they can participate in programs that will lead to more renewable energy in the division of power's portfolio. We also heard from you all that it is very important to have many touch points and many opportunities for input into our aggregation program moving forward. And we completely agree with that. Our goal is to be 100% transparent in the way that we go about forming our aggregation program, but it's also this is a community choice aggregation program, and we take the words community very seriously, and getting community input and advice is really important. You all are a critical piece of that puzzle, but we are also reaching out at the neighborhood level to hear from our residents directly what they would like to see in their aggregation program, as well as most of you know, we've held 2 public meetings to provide an overview to kind of our population at large on what we're working on as far as the aggregation program goes. As well as we've been having one-on-one meetings with you. We would like to continue to do that. We want to maintain an openness to continuing to have one-on-one meetings with you all. Certainly an openness to having additional public meetings as necessary. And then we'll have 2 public meetings, as Scott mentioned at our last meeting, to really vet the governance and operations plan, because those are critical documents that folks have a right to kind of understand and fully fully understand as part of the structure that PUCO puts forward for us as a community choice aggregator. So continue, please, to provide your input. We've been so excited to have these one-on-one conversations that we've had because, as Jenna has said, you've been bringing solutions to us. And as Jenna and as Erin mentioned, we're learning this all together. So the more that we can hear your solutions and your advice, the better our program will be. We also heard that we need to be sensitive to the unintended consequences that the aggregation program may create for our low-income residents, and that is also very important to us. We're going to work to incorporate a very thoughtful and intentional discussion related to unintended consequences into meeting 4. But we also wanted to let you know that we are planning to include a resident-driven equitable engagement in our climate action plan processes, where we'll be discussing sustainability programming with the community. And we also know and heard from you all that one of the most critical pieces to making sure that folks understand the aggregation program and its benefits, but also, you know, its impacts on community members is with the organizations that are enrolling customers in PIP, so that those organizations are able to appropriately advise PIP customers about the benefits of PIP and why, you know, PIP is so important for some customers who would otherwise want to participate in the aggregation program, so that they understand fully, you know, if I choose to not go on PIP and stay with the aggregation, these would be the effects to me as a customer. And then lastly, it's hard to do full justice to that conversation. It is a deep conversation, and it's a rich one that, you know, is really important for us to have. So I do want to kind of acknowledge that, is that there's a lot there when we talk about unintended consequences and equitably driven decision making. And we really want to engage in that with you. And so we're really happy to have heard that feedback and input. And then lastly, one of our breakout sessions really focused on how do we engage and communicate with folks who have already shopped for energy, and what kind of messaging should we put together so that it resonates with folks. And so you all provided really great feedback to us in that session as well, where you gave us really candid advice about what customers need to hear. And we are working on putting together some design resources for this that'll use the messaging that you've kind of suggested for us all that emphasizes the renewable energy angle. Thanks, Sonia.
Great. Thank you, Elena. So wanted to take just a few minutes to get feedback and questions just on that recap. And specifically, have we captured that feedback correctly? So on that last slide from Elena, is there anything that we're missing or anything that's helpful to stop and clarify from that last meeting? I'll just flip back actually so you can take a look at the slide. Great, thank you, John Paul. If there is nothing further, and of course, feel free if something comes up as we're going along to pop it in the chat, and we can come back to it as we go. Then I will turn it over to Jenna to talk a little bit, and we're going to start going into details of renewable energy land and some new terms and tricks.
Thanks, Tanya. Thank you. Go to the next slide. So I want to spend a little bit of time level setting us on some terms that we're going to dig into throughout the rest of the presentation as it relates to renewable energy for the CCA program. So at a high level, there are 2 vehicles, so to speak, that are used to acquire renewable energy. These are renewable energy certificates and power purchase agreements. So I'll start with the renewable energy certificate, also known as a REC. This is a credit that a person or an organization buys that represents the renewable energy generated elsewhere in a grid. So it represents the clean energy components of renewable energy installations that are already online. So you can imagine that there's a large wind farm in Oklahoma that is generating renewable energy, and you could be a small business owner downtown. You want to source your energy for your business from clean renewable energy, but you can't install solar or wind at your facility. So you would purchase a REC to ensure that clean energy is going into the grid and offsetting the energy use that you're using at your facility. The upside of RECs is that they're very easy to purchase, and they come in a range of price points depending on where the REC is sourced from and some of the validity and credits around it. The downside is that it doesn't necessarily mean new renewable energy installation is being created and coming into the grid. And depending on the price point that you're looking at, it could be outside of what you define as local. But that's high level about RECs. Another option is a power purchase agreement, also known as a PPA. This is a contractual agreement where a developer designs and installs a large-scale renewable energy installation, and a customer or organization agrees to buy the energy from that installation over time at a predetermined price. So the upside of a power purchase agreement is that you can directly contribute to local renewable energy installations. So you would work with the developer to create renewable energy that otherwise wouldn't be online, and you can negotiate the contracts and benefits that support your other goals for your CCA program. The downside is that because it is actual new generation of energy, the contracts take time, and the development and installation of the program takes time because of the scale. So next slide, we'll talk about a couple of examples of what this looks like in the real world. So down south in Cincinnati, they have a community choice aggregation program. And just last year, they signed a power purchase agreement for 65 megawatts of renewable energy to source their program. And they were able to define local through this contract as within 100 miles of City Hall. And additionally, through the contract negotiation, they could guarantee a project labor agreement that ensured that there was job training and wage rates for the installation of the solar, which is happening just outside of Cincinnati. And then the city also retains the RECs for the renewable installation. So 65 megawatts may seem like a lot. It only accounts for about 16% of their overall CCA load. But that's one example that we have near us. And then if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about program across the country. So San Jose has a community choice aggregation program. They scaled up very rapidly and signed 3 power purchase agreements in, I think, just under a year to source 262 megawatts of solar. Their boundary for local was a little bit wider, so their installations are within 275 miles of their city. But similar in their contract negotiations, they are able to ensure that the infrastructure is built with union labor and that there is competitive pricing through their installation. They also teamed up with a couple of other local CCAs in the San Jose area as they were contracting with their 2 power purchase agreements from earlier in this year. So these are just a few illustrative examples of how PPAs and RECs can serve CCA programs and not only support renewable energy development, local renewable energy development, but also can support some of the other goals that are really important for the city and the community around the aggregation program.
Great, thank you, Jenna. I'm going to turn it over now to Frank to just preview a little bit of what this might look like for Columbus.
All right, thanks, Sonia. So what we have here is traditionally what you might see in a lot of not just aggregations, but also what we would consider large commercial and industrial or C&I deals, where we would traditionally go out and acquire either power purchase agreements for a wind asset or solar asset. And what we did differently with this was we created a product that kind of inverts the process. What I mean by that is, let's say that you have a large corporation that we're going to go serve with renewable assets. and this corporation is going to require 100 megawatts of capacity. So in a lot of cases, what would happen is the company, the supplier, would go and strike the deal and then go acquire the assets. We've flipped that upside down. We started negotiations with developers a couple of years ago relative to a very large deal that was publicly announced that we did with Google. So we had the assets in our back pocket and ready to serve. And we're, in advance of this deal, we have continued the acquisition of more assets to be able to serve that. So it's a product that we created, we call Integrated Renewable Energy, or IRE. One thing you'll discover throughout this process is that our industry loves TLAs, three-letter acronyms. So here's another one for you. IRE is something that you'll hear a lot through this process, and it's essentially the product that we're bringing to bear. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sonia, but here in a minute, I'm going to show you what we have in front of us as much as I can show you to see how we're going to exceed the expectations of the city for this load as we move forward. So back to you, Sonia.
Thanks very much. So just want to mention, so we're going to dive right into the Columbus specific example here in a second. And we'll get sort of feedback on some of these product types as well. But before we go forward, since this is a lot of dense content, just want to get a sense for folks, from folks, how comfortable you are with what's been shared so far. I know we are in that three-letter acronym world. So we can just do a really quick kind of one finger, we need to go back to PPAs, we need to go back to RECs, let's spend a little bit more time here, or feeling pretty comfortable with this, 4 or 5 fingers. Can I just kind of see that from the group?
This is Mark. Sorry, my camera's not working, but I'm good.
You're good. Okay, I'm seeing, yeah, feel free to use the chat as well. I am seeing some 3s and 4s. I think sounds like we're pretty good, but let's just pause for a moment. Any clarifying questions that would be helpful before we move on to the Columbus specific application here? Okay. Well, don't be shy as we go ahead. I know there is a lot of technical stuff here, and it can get confusing as we go. So please pipe up at any point. All righty. So Jenna, do you want to just give us a quick contextualization here?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that the official number is that Columbus will have the 3rd largest CCA in the country and the largest outside of California, which is super exciting. And another fun metric that we have been using for scale is that Columbus is one of 25 cities in the American Cities Climate Challenge, many of which are pursuing PPAs on their own, and the aggregate of all other 24 cities' PPA agreements through the American Cities Climate Challenge is roughly what just Columbus alone is going to contract for the aggregation program. So the scale here is really exciting for our near and our long-term climate goals, and just the immense amount of renewable energy that we're going to see installed here in our state in the near and long term is really impactful. So we just wanted to share that all with you, the scale of the CCA program compared to what we're seeing across the country.
Great. All right, let's dive back into a little bit more detail, one cut deeper on integrated renewables.
So we touched on this slide a minute ago, and here you can see some of the specifics, but I really want to let's go ahead and go to the next slide, because this is where the rubber meets the road. So when we first started talking with the city, Elena and some of her folks and I chatted early on, as did our president, Scott Slisher. And we heard their goals, and then we had a pretty clear picture of what the development timeline in Ohio was going to be for these renewable assets, which created a bit of a gap to meet the city's goals of being up and running next year. And then when the full-on IRE assets would have their delivery date, if you will. So we have to create what we call our bridge phase. And as it looks here, it looks like it's one phase, 21 and 22. But as we just so the group knows, we are engaged with the city multiple times throughout any given week. I think Erin Beck has probably blocked me on her cell phone now at this point. But we have very productive, very lively conversations with Trey Bell and the city to really devise this. And I apologize, you're quickly going to hear a cat going crazy behind me. So what we've determined is, we are not locked into what a 2-year bridge looks like. We can customize this, and we can, as I keep saying, meet or exceed the needs of the city and the city's consultant. So we're in talks right now. 2021 is we're pretty focused on what that's going to be. It will be RECs, and then it's just a matter of deciding which RECs that we want. And then 2022, some of the assets that we're going to talk about will be coming online. You can also see in the bottom right, we've done an approximation of where some of these assets are located, and then the size of some of the assets. And I'm going to get into more detail there here in a second. Getting back to the timeline, you can see that in 23, we're full on IRE, and then we go through the remainder of the Master Services Agreement out through 2034. So let's look at the next slide, and I'll give you a little bit more detail. Now, one of the first things that you're going to notice, again, you see the map and the locations, and you see a lot of unnamed projects. And now, why is that? Are we being secretive? The answer is no. We are in negotiations with each of these various projects. You can see where they are and what the approximate location. So why do we need to be a little bit opaque? Because the agreements, as we're negotiating with them, they're negotiating their siting, meaning where they're going to place them. They have to work with the local communities. They have to work with the state. And we don't want to do anything that upsets that apple cart, because if we do so, let's say unnamed project number 1, we start talking about that, and then word gets out, and then all of a sudden there's opposition in the community, or there's some other thing that blocks that. That's detrimental to this program, and we don't want to do anything that jeopardizes assets coming online. This is a dynamic list. I've shown this list to Trey Bell and to the city on several occasions, and it changes. But the main thing I will show you is we are in talks right now for a total capacity, looking down at the bottom of the table to the left, of 1,063 megawatts. And the requirement that we have for Columbus is approximately 700 megawatts. The variable there will be how many customers opt into the program and how many opt out. So that, again, will be a dynamic number. 2 projects you can see are public and we have closed. That's Emerson Creek 1 and 2. They are wind projects up in Huron County, Ohio. And as more of these contracts get finalized, we will update this list and show you where these specific locations are. So that's pretty much it for the assets. Again, this is a dynamic, ever-changing list, and we will keep you guys updated as it goes along. But things are looking very positively.
Thanks, Frank. All right. Let's pause for a moment for any questions from folks. Now, this was exciting and detailed information on the potential future of renewables for Columbus. Questions, reactions?
Yeah, hey Frank, this is Mark. I hate to bring it up. Any concerns on power siting, board approval on any of these? Not
that we've heard. We're talking to each of these developers almost on a daily basis. So that we're clear, there's several entities within the deregulated companies of AEP Our counterpart, AEP Energy Partners, which goes out and procures energy for co-ops and for other municipalities, are the ones negotiating this. I talk with that individual almost 2-3 times a week. Just getting a gut check, and things are looking very positive. So at this point, no concerns.
What about transmission from each of these areas? Does the transmission ability exist already? Do we have to build any infrastructure for that since these are new projects?
That, to the best of my knowledge, we do not have to build new transmission. Ohio's been blessed with a very robust transmission infrastructure. Part of, and I'm going to quickly get out over my skis here because I'm not an engineer. I run a sales organization, but I do know that a key milestone for each of these projects is the interconnect into the transmission grid, and across the board, most of these have already crossed that threshold or quickly to do so.
I have a question. I got a mailer from AEP Ohio, and it's to sign up for something called Clean Choice Energy. If I were to sign up for something like this, my thinking is that I would not be automatically pulled into the aggregation program. So this just seems counterproductive. I was wondering if you know anything about that.
That wouldn't determine whether or not you're pulled into the aggregation. The only customers that we exclude from the aggregation list are customers that have already switched to another supplier, okay, which is separate of your utility, or somebody that's on that's already on PEP, which we talked about earlier is a PUCO requirement. I'm not very familiar with that one, Rachel. The utility has to keep an arm's length distance from their deregulated affiliate. So the long and short of it is I don't know anything about AEP Ohio before you know something about AEP Ohio.
Okay.
But I'll do some research on that. But that will not preclude a customer from joining the aggregation.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
And what if you've already selected AEP for, I'm trying to, it's whatever the area is for your power. So like I did the AEP choice for the renewables already, the cleaner energy thing where I've selected in. Does this automatically pull me into AEP Energy because I've already signed up for AEP Energy, or will I have to opt in myself because I've already signed up with AEP Energy?
Great question, Beth. So if you have already enrolled with AEP Energy or any other supplier, you're considered a switched customer. And what we mean by that is you have made a determination that you want to switch your supply to a third-party supplier, be it AEP Energy or anybody else. Being a switched customer, we don't want to override the customer's choice to do that, so we'll exclude those from the initial aggregation list. To answer your question directly about opting in, yes, you would have to call into AEP Energy and say, I'd like to end this program and go into the Columbus Community Choice aggregation. Any other questions? Okay, Sonia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks. All right, well, if there is nothing further, then I think we can go into talking a little bit more about some of the benefits associated with these renewable installations, and I will turn it over to Scott.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to go to this next slide. We've been talking a little bit about the aggregation and how will it support job creation in the state of Ohio and Columbus. And there was some discussion, I think, about regionally how that might help. Frank was able to show you that the Ohio map with those installations all around, but for the installed capacity, it creates jobs in Ohio. We've run through a model, and the model did produce or induce roughly 4,463 jobs. And again, that's going back to the incredible amount of energy that we're producing and the number of, just the sheer number of locations and installations that we're creating. We can rely on the local job training programs and provide job reporting as the projects get underway. We just want you to know that for the time being, once we get those things up and moving and under contract, then we can provide feedback to you. But I think the good thing too that we need to point out, these are good paying jobs a lot, and they're across a number of demographics. And as you can see there on the right side of that slide, it just shows all phases, electrical engineers, technicians doing the drawings, laying it out, the manufacturing, lots and lots of people. You see the word engineers up there quite a bit, industrial engineers, and then the on-site labor, the construction, which comprises of the electricians, software engineers, and structural engineers. And it's going to be a pretty massive undertaking. And then obviously this will boost the local employment and supports the local and regional economy. I think at the end of the day, this is a lot of power, and it's going to take us years to put this together, and it will have Ohio's going to be busy with renewable energy. Next slide. The electricity generation mix for Columbus residents is currently approximately 80% from fossil fuels. Really what I wanted to show in this part of the presentation is the consumption by source. And as you can see here, natural gas is at 28.9%. And I think this is from 2018. And everyone, EIA is a website you can go to get overwhelming amount of information from. But as you can see from here, coal currently still is the main group source that we're receiving our electric from, and that's 51.2%. And again, I think that's 2 years ago. Over time, the share of coal has decreased as we move from coal to natural gas. We've been pretty lucky, very lucky since 2008 that natural gas prices are coming down tremendously. I think they were at a high of, call it $13, and now they're down, last a couple months ago at $1.50. So Ohioans, whether they understand it or not, have been very fortunate to have cheap energy. But the other interesting thing is Ohio had the 4th largest electric sector in terms of emissions in 2017. And so the next slide I'm going to show you, we'll just talk a little bit about the emissions that come from the sources of energy. If we can get to that one, please. I got rid of a number of other sources because they were so small and obviously don't really even register. For example, nuclear, solar, wind, the emissions are negligible. So here we see coal. This goes back to 2009, and we can see that coal in 2010 was made up a bulk of your emissions, and it has been slowly coming downward, and due in part to the emissions, clean emissions requirements that they put on the coal plants, and the reduction that we're seeing in the number of plants being used for coal. And then that teal green, you can see the natural gas production is coming up more and more, and some of the emissions come from that. But what you don't see, and again, it's negligible because nuclear, wind, and solar, are producing little to no emissions. They don't even register. And I think that's a main reason, a large reason why we're obviously moving towards pursuing this renewable energy initiative. I'm going to hand it back over to Elena. Thank you. If no one has any questions.
Hey, Scott, I had just had one question about your previous slide. When you said that we have the 4th highest electricity sector emissions, is that nationally? Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct.
Wow. Okay, thanks.
That's again, I think, taken from EIA as well. All right, yeah. That website. Yep.
Wow.
Elena, do you want to talk us through the implications for Columbus emissions?
I apologize, everyone. I'm having a little bit of an audio issue. So I know computer audio is never quite as good as the phone audio. So if you're getting feedback, I apologize. So Scott did a great job setting up the conversation here, right? About like what's at stake with the energy transition, right? And what do we stand to gain? And so I just kind of wanted to talk about that in terms of emissions reductions. And what that could mean for Columbus. This is the graph that you see here is a snippet from the MORPC greenhouse gas inventory that is done each year for the city of Columbus. John Paul, who is on this call, is actually the one who really plugs and chugs the numbers and works to help us understand what our greenhouse gas emissions look like at the city level. You can see here that we are able to track our emissions by sector. So we're able to know, what portion of our emissions come from residential energy, what portions of our emissions come from commercial, industrial, transportation, solid waste, fugitive emissions, and water and wastewater. And I know these graphs are a little bit small and the percentages might be a bit difficult to read, but I think the important thing to kind of note here is the city has been tracking our overall community-wide greenhouse gas emissions since 2013. And John Paul just delivered a final report to me for our 2019 emissions levels. And you can see, we've bounced a little bit up and down, but we haven't been able to make the really big significant overall emission reductions that we're going to need to make to stay on track to reach the carbon neutral goal that the mayor mentioned in his State of the City in February. So community choice aggregation is a great opportunity for us to really start to tackle that overall reduction that is so important to us from the emissions perspective, because it just has the opportunity, as we've heard about today, to have that rapid transition to renewable energy. The sectors that'll be most affected, as you all know, I know that I'm kind of being maybe a bit repetitive here, is the residential energy sector and a bit of the small commercial sector as well. And as we talked about before, most residential customers are served by AEP Ohio through the wires, right? There are about 14 to 15,000 Columbus customers that are served by the Division of Power, but the vast majority of Columbus customers are served by AEP Ohio. And so that, is why we're able to have the potential to really impact emissions from the residential sector. You can see that, last year, our emissions from the residential sector were about, the proportion of our total emissions from the residential sector were about, 23-24% of our total emissions. And so, taking that and, I might be butchering this a little bit, John Paul, but, we had about 2.4 million metric tons, I think, that came from the residential sector last year. And so, AEP Energy has roughly estimated that we could reduce that by almost half, or just exactly half, to 1.2 million metric tons, to result in a 1.2 million metric ton reduction in emissions. And so that would result in about an 11% overall reduction in our emissions. You may have seen some other figures. I've seen, you know, some other folks report, you know, up to like an 18 to 19% reduction in emissions. And that is from, you know, the kind of the building sector. When you add transportation on top of that, our overall emissions reduction that we could stand to gain from community choice aggregation is at about 11% reduction in emissions. So that's huge. In one single action, being able to have that level of reduction, you're not going to find another action that can really do that at that level. But I talked a little bit longer on this because I know we have a little bit more time and buffer to talk about this, but I think that there were probably some questions in the chat that came in that we can try to address when we get to the Q&A, but it looks like we're going to have a lot of time for those, so happy to do that.
Did you want to pause and do any clarification now, or should we?
I can. Sorry, I wasn't reading while I was talking, Sonia, so if you want to pose them.
No worries. Yeah, so I guess just first a quick clarification on what fugitive emissions are, which appear to be based out of Washington, D.C. with 3.8 star out of 5 on Google, according to the chat. But
so John Paul is the best to answer this, but
Sure.
like process-based emissions is my understanding, John Paul, that are not accounted for in other ways. Can you go into a better description than I can?
Sure. So for the most part, fugitive emissions is a catch-all for a lot of different ways that emissions might leak out into the system and be unaccountable. For the most part, in Columbus, this is going to mean leaky natural gas pipes. So whether that's at your home or somewhere in the transmission of that natural gas throughout Columbus, you're going to see, I think we assumed 0.5% this year of all natural gas that gets shipped to consumers ends up leaking out into the atmosphere.
Thank you.
And it looks like the other questions going on in the chat is sort of around the number of millions of metric tons from AEP submission, and it looks like Frank will get back to us on that, asking some internal questions. Maybe we can move on to a little update on public health benefits.
That's me too. And I'll probably ask for some assists from John Paul here as well. But, you know, one of the things that we talked about at our last meeting was that regionally we stand to gain about a $49 million public health benefit regionally from the community choice aggregation. So that's really exciting. But one of the things that we heard from you and that I was also just challenging our team on is how can we make this more discreet, right? How can we make it something that people can really understand? And I think we're still on a journey there. I don't think we've gotten to a place where, you know, we perfectly have, you know, the silver bullet for how we can communicate discreetly what the public health benefits are. But with the assistance of our MORPC team, again, we were able to start to take the information that we provided to you, run it through some US EPA calculators to start to get to a place where we can start to quantify what does this really mean at the state level for public health benefits. And I think the natural question is, why are we looking at this at the state level? Weren't you trying to get more discreetly to what was going to be happening in Columbus? And I think that's a fair question. What these calculators do, though, is they recognize that air quality benefits do not know territorial boundaries, right? They don't understand that Columbus is Columbus and Central Ohio is Central Ohio. And so these calculators really try to recognize the air quality benefits that happen statewide when you're installing renewable energy. And so again, my layperson understanding of how the calculator works is you first are looking at this 700 megawatts of renewable energy and the emissions reductions that come along with that. And then you're taking that and converting that into what does that really mean in terms of health consequences? And so we know from these calculators that there's an estimated, there's some really exciting estimated public health benefits statewide, that there would be 22 fewer premature deaths as a result of bringing online 700 megawatts of renewable energy, that there would be 654 fewer cases of breathing illnesses because of this size and scale of installation, which really, you know, to us then translates to these other really important factors, right? As people who live in the community, is it's 6,480 fewer school days missed for our children, and, you know, over 1,000 fewer work days missed for ourselves. And so that leads, you know, obviously to the public health benefits, but also really important economic consequences, right? If our kids are able to go to school and we're able to go to work, that's a good thing for everyone. And so, you know, we're going to keep, as I mentioned, trying to drill down into this, trying to understand more discreetly the public health benefits that will come to our community. But this was helpful to me to, instead of just having we expect that we'll have positive benefits for respiratory illnesses and heart disease, able to start to understand some metrics on what this could really look like statewide for us, and what the benefits are that will, you know, again, come statewide, but also will be experienced within our community.
Thank you, Elena. Any questions? So that concludes our benefit section here. Any questions on any of the economic piece, the emissions piece, or the public health piece that were just shared? And we can also go back to really any of the earlier slides that we've gone through so far. We put all this together.
Yeah, really, you know, I expected that folks would have lots of questions. So, you know, we have a decent amount of time to discuss, you know, any questions about Frank's presentation or any, you know, questions that have come up here. If not, you know, always happy to kind of move forward and give back some time, but we definitely want to be sure that you all understand what we think the renewable energy transition will look like. We've got a lot of questions in our public hearings about this to try to understand what the ramp up would look like. So I definitely want to give time for you all, you know, as ambassadors for your organizations. We don't want to leave any questions or confusion on the table about what the ramp up might look like, or what the benefits will be.
So I do have a question.
Feedback as well. Yeah, go ahead.
I know, you know, we've talked a lot about having local renewables, and I think sometimes in the minds of people that we talk to and some voters, they kind of think like they're going to start seeing, you know, solar or wind like here, either within like the city of Columbus city limits or, you know, Franklin County. And I know we're talking more about just like Ohio, and I think part of that is, you know, obviously because of land space, and it's hard to build a utility scale solar, you know, array within Franklin County. But, you know, are there any ideas of either making like smaller installations within the city of Columbus, or even looking at potentially like community solar projects in some of some neighborhoods, just so people can actually also see where some of that renewable energy is coming from?
That's a really great question, Sarah. And I think, you know, Sonia, if you want to flip back to that slide that's got the locations, you know, you're right. The locations are definitely driven, to my understanding, and Frank can chime in here. You know, they're sited in places where you're able to get that utility scale solar, where the topography works for the wind. But I think an important conversation that we should have as we kind of are transitioning to meeting 4 is about the value of promoting distributed generation in our community, and whether that's something that we want to prioritize when we think about our community grant programs. We have heard as we've gone to commission meetings that that is something that that local commissions are interested in. They do want to see distributed generation on their houses. And so I think it's something that we should think about as we think about community grants, and we're going to be looking to you guys to help us decide and prioritize, you know, where does that fit in the overall priority scale for community grant programming.
Elena just answered that perfectly. I can add nothing.
Any other questions or just feedback or reflections from what you've seen so far on the scope of the benefits, what this looks like in terms of kind of orders of magnitude of energy or installations? Anything else that's coming up for folks?
Yeah, Sonia, this is Erin. You hear me? You hear me? You hear me?
I think you're probably getting audio through your computer and then unmuting.
Well, she's struggling with that. Let me ask a different question. On the slide that you had that showed the mix of power between natural gas, coal, and nuclear, how much of Ohio's power comes from, yeah, that one. How much of that actually comes from Ohio? Is it mostly in-state generated, or do we get much from outside?
I'm not sure who is the best person. It probably will be John Paul or Scott to really speak to this. John Paul, I feel like I've elevated you to a presenter, so I apologize for that. But if one of you has the answer, if you could please help us, that'd be great.
Sure. Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, my internet is like terrible right now for whatever reason.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand of the mix of these fuels that power Ohio, how much of that is actually generated in state?
I believe it's around 70%.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And for the most part, what is imported is just right over the border in West Virginia.
Just want to, okay, we have Erin's comment in the chat that exciting to think about the health benefits, not only for residents, but just for the state, sort of the broader public good generated by reducing particulate matter, which it is always shocking, the new levels of illness and such that can be associated with particulate matter. All right. Well, if there's nothing further from folks, please feel free to chime in or stop me in the chat here. But we did want to give a little bit of a preview of what's coming up in meeting 4. Elena, did you want to talk to us a little bit and then we'll do a quick poll?
Yeah, so we've definitely put a lot of stake in meeting 4, and I hope that we can live up to all of the expectations that we've created for this meeting. But just to remind everyone, meeting 4 is, the goal is to spend time delving into how to use the CCA program to support community sustainability goals. And for us, that really means tying this work strongly to the climate action work that the city is working on, so that we're able to, not only, as we mentioned during the presentation, on the overall greenhouse gas reductions that will be directly seen from the community choice aggregation program, experience those reductions, but also use the community grant funding that will come back to the city to support additional programming that will help us to see overall greenhouse gas emission reductions from other sectors, from the residential sector, and also support, the equity work that we're trying to do in our sustainability work, also support the adaptation work. But we recognize that there's, like all things in life, right? There is a large laundry list of work that could be done and could be funded by the Community Choice Aggregation Program. But early in this program, there will be limited funding for that. And probably always, right? You always want more money than you have. So there will always, be a limited bucket. And so the thing that is going to be really important to us in meeting 4 is understanding from you all, with the limited resources that we will have, what should be prioritized, right? Is the most important high impact practices, right, that we should be supporting through our community choice aggregation community grants. And so Sonia and I were brainstorming how best to help us as a planning team prepare for meeting 4 and what you could help us do so that we could prepare for meeting 4. And we thought one way to do that is to try to get some indicative signals from you all about, how, on a higher level, where you think programming should be, or program funding should go to support. And so Sonia just switched up on me, but really that, our climate action work, the way I like to think about it, it's split into 5 categories. It's climate solutions the Columbus way, which is really, empowering a culture of change makers, climate change makers, and that, involves our Green Spot Columbus program, as well as a bunch of other programs, right, to get residents to feel empowered to take climate action. Our Sustainable Neighborhoods chapter, which spends a lot of time thinking about what neighborhood level programming do we need to have neighborhoods that are well adapted to climate change, and are also creating healthy neighborhood ecosystems. And I recognize all this is at a kind of high level and it's a lot for everyone to take in. But again, we're just looking kind of for some indicative indicators from you all about where you generally think programming from the aggregation program should fit. And then the 3 categories, which are much more typical of a climate action plan, no matter what city you're in, right, is we know that the majority of our emissions come from buildings, transportation, and waste. And so in those categories, it's at both the residential and commercial level, looking at renewable energy and energy efficiency, and then the transportation level, looking at embracing zero emission options and mode shift, getting people out of their cars onto bicycles, walking, using alternative forms of transportation. And while in our community, waste is not a major player in our driver of our overall greenhouse gas emission reductions, it's something that cannot be ignored. John Paul keeps mentioning this to me, right? As the little brother of CO2 really has emerged to be methane, and there's a lot of methane emissions that come from our solid waste. And so we can't, you know, ignore waste. And so we wanted to understand from you, you know, and I think Sonia's got a poll that she'll probably set up, just, you know, for these community grants, where should we be targeting these community grants, and which of these 5 buckets? I think the other important thing to note is we've heard a lot from you about how important energy equity is in addressing energy poverty. And I really see those 2 things as cross-cutting through our Sustainable Neighborhoods chapter, as well as our Buildings chapter. So as you're voting, just think about that, right? Those really fit between those 2 categories. Yeah, so I see Laura's question about, do you have a sense of the budget for this potential programming? And that is really a good question. And it's one that is still fluid. Frank was kind of talking about, you know, we're having these weekly conversations and we're trying to understand, you know, what funding will be able to come back to the city. There are kind of a variety of reasons why that is kind of still a fluid number. One is, you know, we won't know for sure what the program participation will be. And the rider, the administrative, you know, rider that will come back for the community grants, you know, will be triggered to, you know, how many people are participating. But we also don't want to prematurely set the rider amount because we need to make sure the overall price is, as we've talked about, competitive with the standard service offer. And so all of those factors, right, we're kind of still playing with. So we're not totally sure what the overall program funding level is going to be able to be. Might be able to have better details on that when we talk in 2 weeks, because we are having a lot of conversations right now. But that's really why we're doing a prioritization exercise, because we know no matter what, we're not going to be able to fund everything.
All righty. Thank you, Elena. So I'm going to launch a poll here in just a moment that will just ask you to kind of give your top top vote or top priority, I think, as we think about these different options. And just a note, which I was trying to edit as you were speaking, Elena, but I'm not sure it's letting me. I did pull out the energy affordability piece as an option here. So since that is something that we've discussed. So at this point, you should see on your screen a list of options, and go ahead and make your selections. If you're having any trouble doing this, feel free to also just pop it in the chat. And I'll give you a minute or 2 to think through.
And as you're voting, if you need any clarification from me, I was trying to give you guys as much information as you could, but I'm happy to provide any clarification to help with your votes.
Okay. Last few seconds here. Get your votes in. All right, I'm going to close this down. I think our abstentions are those of us who are on the organizing team, I am guessing. So just to give a sense of what we got here, is it looks like a strong, slightly edging out are the buildings and renewable energy and energy efficiency work, with also strong interest in adaptation as well as the energy affordability pieces. Does anyone have any additional? We're going to definitely get into this in 2 weeks, but just wondering whether anyone has any additional reflections or anything that came up as you're thinking through this.
Thank you for this. Yeah, please, if you have anything else to kind of color this, that would be really helpful to us. Ultimately, this just helps us with some indicative, what types of things do we want to present to the group as options for our prioritization. But if there's any information that you'd like to add to help us as we think about meeting 4, that's very well received, so that we put together a really good meeting 4.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. So at this point, we are actually wrapped with our formal agenda here. Just a little reminder that we will be coming back together on October 22nd to talk more about the content of the community priorities and those sustainability goals. Thank you again, everyone, for participating, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.